The widow from the west found refuge in a buried wagon, and when she lifted the cover, she burst into uncontrollable tears. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying fascinating stories like this. Click the like button, and let's start the narration. At 32, Rosa Delgado realized that the debts left by her deceased husband were greater than all the assets owned by banker Whitmore. Whitmore presented her with papers bearing forged signatures of Miguel, loans he had never requested, and accumulated interest that turned $200 into $2,000. Whitmore informed her with a calculated smile, "Your ranch will be auctioned tomorrow at noon unless you get the full amount tonight." Rosa knew the truth. Miguel had found irregularities in the bank records and warned that he would report them to the government authorities. 2 days later, Miguel was found dead after an incident with his horse. Now Whitmore used fraudulent papers to strip her of everything. The funeral had taken place that morning with only 3 attendees in a town of 300 residents. The respectable ladies avoided her, as working on the ranch alongside her husband had made her seem unfeminine in their eyes. The men saw her as an accessible possession, now that she lacked a protector. Rosa tried to contact Sheriff Morrison, but he was on Whitmore's payroll. She consulted the local lawyer, who explained that the law protected bankers, not destitute widows. The parish offered her prayers, but no tangible support. That night, she packed minimal luggage: a blanket, a canteen, Miguel's rifle with 12 rounds. A picture from their wedding. At daybreak, she saddled her mare and set off into the desert before Whitmore dispatched his men to hunt her down. For 3 days, she traveled forgotten trails that Miguel had taught her. The Sun King of the Arizona desert blazed relentlessly. The water supply ran out on the second day. The mare was limping due to the rocky terrain. At sunset on the third day, when Rosa no longer believed she could go on, she spotted something strange in a desolate valley among rock formations. She saw partially collapsed wooden structures, remnants of a mining town abandoned decades ago. Then she guided her mare toward those remains. She found a well whose water, though murky, was drinkable. She walked through empty houses with collapsed roofs and rotten floors. No place offered safe shelter. It was then that she noticed something that didn't belong to the colonial town. Among mesquite bushes and accumulated sand, the deteriorated canvas of a wagon partially peeked out. It was almost completely buried, only the top part was visible, as if a sandstorm had slowly swallowed it. Rosa approached cautiously. It was a settler's wagon of the type used by families traveling to California during the gold rush. The canvas, though faded, remained intact, protecting its contents. She began to dig with her hands around the rear entrance. The sand was very compact. It was an exhausting task under the setting sun. After an hour, she managed to open a hole large enough to slip inside. The interior was dimly lit. Rosa waited for her eyes to adjust to the darkness. When she could finally see clearly, she lifted the canvas covering the load, and tears began to run down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of absolute astonishment at what she had found. The interior of the wagon was perfectly preserved. Wooden trunks carefully stacked, boxes sealed with wax, personal belongings arranged as if the owners could return at any moment. When she opened the first chest, she found exquisitely made women's clothing, silk dresses she had only seen in pictures of ladies from San Francisco. Among the clothes, she discovered a metal chest full of jewelry, pearl chokers, gold earrings, and brooches adorned with gems. The second trunk held papers, deeds to a silver mine in the nearby mountains. There were bank certificates from San Francisco for amounts that left her breathless. $15,000 in one account, $8,000 in another, all under the name of the Castellanos family. However, it was the third chest that made her break down completely. Inside, it held objects that told the tragedy of a broken family. There were children's toys, a family Bible with names and notes, and photos of a young couple with 3 small children. At the bottom of the trunk, she found a leather-bound notebook, opened it with trembling hands, and read the first entry. The 15th of April, 1875. Today, we left our mine after extracting the last vein of silver. My husband Rodrigo says that with what we've saved, we can start a new life in California. The little ones are excited about the idea of seeing the sea. We hid this wagon with our most precious belongings while traveling light to San Francisco, and we will return in 3 months to retrieve it. Signed by Elena Castellanos. Rosa flipped through the pages looking for more notes, but the diary ended abruptly. Then she searched through the papers until she found withered newspaper clippings. Family murdered on the route to California. Rodrigo Castellanos, his wife Elena, and their 3 children were found dead 40 kilometers from Silver Springs. Authorities believe it was bandits, but the victims' personal belongings were not stolen. The local sheriff closed the case for lack of sufficient evidence in the month of May 1875. Rosa reviewed the article 3 times before fully understanding it. The fortune of the Castellanos family was hidden in that car. They had traveled light to California and were killed before they could return. Those who killed them never found the buried car with all the family's wealth. She continued her search through the papers and found something additional. A will signed by Rodrigo Castellanos a few days before his death. If my family and I die, I give all our properties and goods to any person of good heart. May they find this hiding place and truly need it. May God bless whoever discovers this and allow them to use our fortune to do good. Rosa settled on the floor of the car, holding the will. Tears flowed uncontrollably. She had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her future. She had escaped to the desert, hoping to survive just a few more days. And now she had not only found refuge, but also an immense fortune. Silver mines, bank accounts, jewels, property titles. More money than she could spend in her entire lifetime. But she had also discovered something deeper. She had found evidence that there were families who loved each other so much that they left inheritances for strangers in need. She had found evidence that love could overcome death. She cried for Miguel, killed for defending the truth. She cried for the Castellanos, slain alongside their children. She cried for all the injustices she had witnessed. But she also shed tears of hope, because for the first time since Miguel's death, she had the power to fight instead of just escape. That night, she curled up, covered with Elena Castellanos' silk dresses, and used Miguel's rifle as a pillow. After weeks, she finally slept without the fear of being discovered. She was unaware that claiming that inheritance would attract dangerous attention. She didn't know that Whitmore was connected to the same criminals who murdered the Castellanos. She never imagined that finding this wagon would place her at the epicenter of a 2-decade conspiracy. However, one thing was clear to her. Now, she was not a helpless widow fleeing injustice, but a woman with means to defend herself. The desert sun woke Rosa. Light filtered through the wagon's canvas for the first time in weeks. She hadn't spent the night terrified, alert to every sound. She stepped out and examined the deserted town more methodically. She found traces of mining activity, sealed tunnels on the hillsides, rusted machinery, half-buried tram tracks. The buildings confirmed that this was Silver Springs, the prosperous mining town that collapsed when the silver ran out in 1834. The well held enough water if she managed it carefully, and among the rubble she found prickly pears with edible fruit and wild herbs that Miguel had taught her to identify. She could survive here for weeks while planning her next move, so she returned to the wagon and examined the documents more closely. The mine's deeds indicated additional unexploited veins. The bank certificates from San Francisco would require identification she lacked, but the jewels were easy to transport and valuable everywhere. She found something else among the documents, a hand-drawn map showing the location of the main entrance to the Castellanos mine, marked just 1 kilometer from the abandoned town, deliberately hidden among rock formations. Rosa decided to inspect the place. She took the rifle, water, and the map and followed the directions until she found an opening in the rock, partially collapsed but still passable. She entered cautiously, lighting her way with an oil lamp found in the cart. At a depth of 30 meters, the main entrance was supported by wooden beams of astonishing solidity. She discovered an excavated room that the Castellanos had used for their work. The untapped silver veins were still visible on the walls. The tools lay piled up as if the workers were to return the next day. In a corner, she found something that made her heart pound. 3 wooden boxes labeled as first quality specimens. Upon opening the boxes, she discovered rock fragments with veins of purest silver of such remarkable thickness that they gleamed even in the faint light of the lamp. Those were not mere samples. It was ore prepared for smelting. Possibly it was the last shipment that the Castellanos had planned to process. She estimated that the amount of silver would yield at least 6.22 kilograms, 200 troy ounces. At current prices, that meant over $3,000 just in this hiding place. However, as Rosa was about to leave the mine, she heard voices coming from outside. She immediately turned off the lamp and hid behind the ore boxes. The trail ends here, commented a hoarse voice that was unfamiliar to her. The marks of her mare were visible as far as this abandoned village. Search every building, ordered a second voice, now known to her. It was Dutch Kruger, Whitmore's foreman, famous for his violent debt collection tactics. "Why is Whitmore so interested in that widow?" inquired the first man. "Because her deceased husband found something that could cause the boss to lose his bank, and perhaps also his neck. Whitmore must ensure that she never contacts the federal authorities." Rosa pressed herself against the rocky wall, controlling her breathing. 5 armed men were searching the town. If they found her hidden in the mine, they would kill her and say she died in the desert. The men approached the mine entrance several times, but the half-collapsed opening made it seem inaccessible. After 2 hours of searching, Dutch shouted orders for them to withdraw. "There is no one here. Surely she died of thirst in some canyon. We'll inform the boss that the matter is settled." Rosa waited another hour before leaving, and upon returning to the town, she observed boot prints in all directions. The subjects had searched all the houses, but they did not notice the wagon hidden among the bushes. That night, as Rosa ate prickly pears and dried meat from the wagon, she pondered what she had heard. Whitmore not only wanted to steal her ranch, but also intended to finish her off for good, since Miguel had found evidence of bank fraud. However, she now possessed resources that Whitmore did not know existed. She had a silver mine, jewels, property deeds, and the Castellanos' will, which legally granted her rights to everything. Even more importantly, she had information about Dutch Kruger confessing to criminal plans. If she could contact the proper federal authorities with evidence of both Miguel's murder and Whitmore's fraud, she could ruin the banker completely. Rosa spent the next 3 days preparing carefully and dug more around the wagon to reach all the chests. She found mining tools, old dynamite that could still be useful, and even a second rifle with ammunition. She examined every document from the Castellanos and discovered that Rodrigo was a mining engineer and that Elena had kept a meticulous record of their activities. The papers revealed not only the location of their main mine, but also 3 additional veins they had planned to explore. She discovered something else at the bottom of a trunk. Correspondence between Rodrigo Castellanos and Federal Marshal James Clayton dated weeks before the family's murder. Marshal Clayton states, "I have compiled evidence of criminal activities in Silver Springs. Local moneylender Thomas Whitmore is implicated in title fraud and also allegedly in the murders of miners who refused to sell their claims. I request a meeting with you in Silver Springs on May 15 to deliver this evidence. Sincerely, Rodrigo Castellanos." Rosa had to read the letter 3 times to fully understand it. The Castellanos were killed because Rodrigo planned to expose Whitmore exactly as happened to Miguel 2 decades later. Whitmore had been committing crimes for decades, illegally taking over properties. He silenced witnesses using his status as a respectable moneylender to cover up murders, and now Rosa possessed documentary evidence of his first major crime. However, seeking justice meant leaving the desert, heading to the nearest town with telegraph service, and contacting the federal authorities. That would mean exposing herself to Whitmore's men who were chasing her. Rosa made a firm decision. She put on one of Elena's refined dresses. She stored the most valuable jewels in a hidden pouch under her skirts and hid the important documents inside her hat. She loaded both rifles and all the available ammunition before departing. She wrote a letter that she left in the wagon, sealed with wax, for whoever would find this refuge after her. The Castellanos lost their lives defending the truth against powerful criminals. I found their refuge while fleeing from those same criminals. I will use the inheritance they left me to achieve the justice they never obtained. If I don't return, let someone else continue this mission. In October, 1995, Rosa Delgado, wife of Miguel Delgado, at dawn she mounted her mare and headed to Tucson, the nearest town with the federal marshal's office. The journey was 3 days through a high-risk area. However, Rosa no longer felt fear. She had evidence capable of ruining Whitmore and a goal that gave her courage. What she did not know was that Dutch Kruger had not reported her death. He had positioned himself 5 kilometers from the deserted hamlet, keeping watch, suspecting that Rosa was still hiding nearby. And that morning, upon spotting a elegantly dressed lady riding east, he instantly recognized the mare. The chase resumed at that moment. Throughout the first day, Rosa rode, keeping away from the main road. She used the paths Miguel had taught her, trails among rocky ravines where tracking was difficult. At dusk, she found a shallow cave to camp and avoided lighting a fire to not attract attention. She ate jerky and drank measured water while scanning the horizon. It was then that she perceived the glow of a campfire less than a kilometer away. Someone was following her, but that individual was confident enough not to hide his presence. Rosa kept watch all night with her rifle ready. At daybreak, she spotted 2 riders inspecting the place where she had taken refuge and recognized Dutch Kruger along with one of his henchmen. She could not face them head-on, as they were 2 armed men against her, but neither could she arrive in Tucson with her pursuers aware of her route. She needed a strategic advantage. She examined the landscape carefully. Ahead stretched a narrow canyon that travelers often took as a shortcut to Tucson. It was the ideal place for an ambush. At least he had the courage to try. Heading to the ravine, Rosa found a high position among the rocks, from where she could clearly see the narrow path. She readied both rifles, one loaded and ready to use, the other as a spare. Then she waited. 2 hours later, Dutch and his companion entered the ravine. Riding with complete confidence, without anticipating opposition from a lonely widow, Rosa fired a single shot that hit the rock in front of the horses. The horses reared violently, nearly throwing their riders. The next shot won't miss, shouted Rosa from her hiding spot. "Drop your weapons and go back the same way." Dutch let out an angry curse. "Whitmore offers a good reward for your capture, widow. We won't surrender to a lucky woman like a novice." Rosa fired again, this time barely grazing Dutch's hat. It was no accident. Miguel taught her how to handle the weapon since she was 15. "I'm no novice, and I have enough bullets to keep you trapped there until you die of thirst. Either you abandon your weapons and survive to get paid another time." Both men looked at each other, trapped in a narrow ravine without adequate cover, while Rosa enjoyed an unbeatable high position. "What guarantee do we have that you won't kill us once we're unarmed?" "My word," exclaimed Dutch, "which is worth more than any promise from Whitmore." After 5 minutes of tense discussion, Dutch and his companion placed their rifles on the ground and headed back on horseback, keeping their hands visible. Rosa waited until they were completely out of sight before coming down. She collected the weapons left behind and the extra ammunition she would need, but she also found something in Dutch's packs. The papers that Whitmore had given him with specific instructions to kill Rosa Delgado and to obtain any document she had related to Miguel Delgado. No witnesses should be left, and you will be paid $500 upon completion of the task. The written proof that Whitmore had ordered his murder constituted impeccable legal evidence. Rosa carefully safeguarded the documents and continued her journey to Tucson, riding all night. At noon the next day, she arrived in the city. Although dusty from the road, she was wearing Elena's elegant dress. Thanks to the dress, she looked like a respectable lady, not a widow on the run. The federal marshal's office was located in downtown Tucson. Rosa entered and requested to speak with Marshal Clayton, the same person Rodrigo Castellanos had tried to contact 20 years earlier. Marshal Clayton died 15 years ago. The assistant informed her, "The current marshal is William Foster. I can assist you." Rosa carefully observed the assistant. He was a young man, about 25 years old, with an honest face that differed markedly from the corruption she had witnessed in Sheriff Morrison. "I need to report a murder, bank fraud, and a criminal conspiracy that has lasted 20 years, Rosa said firmly. The assistant looked at her in surprise. "These are very serious accusations, ma'am." "Delgado, Rosa Delgado," she replied, "and I have documentary evidence of everything I am reporting." The assistant took her to a private office, where Rosa spent 3 hours telling the whole story. She recounted Miguel's murder after discovering the fraud, the false debt documents, the forced auction of their ranch, and her escape into the desert. Then she displayed the Castellanos documents and the letters Rodrigo had sent to Marshal Clayton. She showed the newspaper clipping reporting the family's murder. Likewise, she presented the mine deeds, which proved that Whitmore had taken possession of their properties after their deaths. "Whitmore has been using the bank to steal properties for decades," Rosa explained. "When someone discovers this, that person dies in a convenient accident. Afterwards, Whitmore seizes the property through false debts." Marshal Foster examined the documents, and his expression grew increasingly serious. "If these documents turn out to be genuine, they would have a devastating impact. Whitmore is being federally charged with multiple homicides and fraud. Besides, I have this," said Rosa, showing the written orders found in Dutch's saddlebags. "Proof that Whitmore ordered my murder." Foster reviewed the orders, and his face hardened. "This is enough to proceed with an arrest immediately. I'll send a telegram to my superior in Phoenix to request authorization for a federal operation." How long will the process take?" "Approximately 2 or 3 days to organize everything. I need to gather more agents, draft arrest warrants, and coordinate with local authorities who are not involved." Rosa felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. 3 days meant remaining exposed in Tucson during that time. "There, Whitmore's men could find me. I need a safe place to stay," she said. Foster nodded. "I know an honorable family in Tucson, the Morsons, who have no ties to the corrupt local sheriff. they will agree to shelter her under federal government protection. In the afternoon, they moved Rosa to a spacious house in Tucson's distinguished neighborhood. Margaret Morrison, a 50-year-old widow, welcomed Rosa with instant understanding. "Marshall Foster has told me about your situation," said Margaret as she showed her a cozy room. "A decade ago, I lost my husband under similar circumstances, powerful men stripping defenseless widows of their property. Since Miguel's death, Rosa experienced a sense of security for the first time. Margaret provided her with clean clothes, hot food, and a bed where she could rest without fear. That night, while Rosa slept, Dutch Kruger arrived in Tucson. He was not alone. He had gathered 6 armed men under Whitmore's orders to locate Rosa before she testified before federal authorities. The pursuit had reached the city. At dawn, Rosa woke up as Margaret softly knocked on her door. "We are in trouble. There are armed men watching the house from the street." Rosa cautiously looked out the window and recognized Dutch alongside 3 of his men, strategically positioned around the property. They could not enter a respectable residence without causing a public scandal, but they would not allow Rosa to leave without capturing her. "I have sent a message to Marshall Foster," said Margaret. "He will arrive with his deputies in an hour." However, an hour proved to be too long a wait. Rosa spotted Dutch talking to a man she recognized, Sheriff Morrison from her town, the same corrupt sheriff who refused to investigate Miguel's death. "They are plotting something," Rosa said. "Morrison can enter the house under the pretext of legal authority." Margaret thought quickly. "I have an idea. My house has a smuggling tunnel that was used before the Civil War. It connects to the cellar of the Grand Hotel at the end of the street." Both women went down to the basement, where Margaret revealed a hidden entrance behind shelves of canned goods. Although narrow and gloomy, the tunnel was passable. Margaret insisted, "Go now. I'll take care of delaying Morrison as much as I can." Rosa grabbed her essential papers and slipped through the passageway. Just as Margaret had assured, she came out in the hotel basement. She used the service stairs to go up and emerge onto the side street. At the very moment she heard loud knocks on the door of Margaret's house, she moved quickly among the morning crowd, avoiding the main avenues. She had to reach Marshall Foster's office before Dutch noticed her escape, but upon arriving at the federal offices, she found the door secured with a chain. A sign indicated, "Marshall Foster called away on urgent business. Returns tomorrow." Rosa experienced an initial moment of panic, but then she perceived movement in the second-floor window. Foster was inside. He had only closed the office as a security measure. She used small stones to tap on the window until Foster looked out. He opened the back door without delay. Foster warned her, "Whitmore's henchmen are scattered throughout the city. I received a telegram from my boss. Whitmore has strong political connections. Several senators are pressuring to have the investigation shelved." "What implications does that have?" "It means we need even more compelling evidence. Both your testimony and the Castellanos' papers are persuasive. However, we require more witnesses or direct material evidence of Whitmore's crimes." Rosa reflected on the Castellanos' mine, the silver veins still unexploited, the boxes of high-purity ore. "I can access the original Castellanos mine. It's full of silver that Whitmore never managed to find after murdering them. If I prove that he actively sought that mine after their deaths, that constitutes a motive for murder." Foster nodded slowly. "That could work. But we would need bank documents proving that Whitmore took control of Castellanos' mining claims right after the murder." "Where would those documents be found?" "In the bank, under lock and key, inside his private office." Rosa picked up on Foster's suggestion without him having to say it. "I have to enter the bank, Whitmore, and steal evidence from his own office?" "Officially, I can't authorize that," Foster said cautiously. "But if new evidence suddenly appeared, I wouldn't ask how you got it." It was a suicidal task. The bank was located in the town, controlled by Whitmore. She would have to travel 3 days back, infiltrate a guarded building, steal documents, and escape without being caught. I need assistance, said Rosa. Foster thought for a moment. I know someone who might agree. A former cavalry soldier, expert in covert operations, with personal reasons to hate Whitmore. An hour later, Rosa met James Holloway. He was a man of 40, face weathered by years in the desert, with a scar across his left cheek. Whitmore took over my sister's ranch 5 years ago, Holloway explained. She killed herself after losing everything. I've been waiting for a chance to get legal revenge. This is dangerous, Rosa warned. If they capture us, Whitmore will kill us both. That's why we'll avoid being caught. Holloway unfolded a map. I know that town better than Whitmore. I know every alley, every building, every escape route. They planned the operation meticulously. They would travel at night to avoid the main roads and enter the town before dawn when surveillance was lowest. Holloway would create a distraction while Rosa entered the bank through a back window that, according to him, had a weak lock. And if I find the documents, Rosa asked, we'll photograph them with this equipment, said Holloway, showing a portable camera. We'll take photographic evidence and leave the originals, so Whitmore won't know we were there until it's too late. That same night, they left with 2 rested horses that Foster had provided them. We rode for 3 days along routes Holloway knew perfectly, avoiding the areas where Dutch might have men watching. They arrived at the town at dawn. On the 4th day, Holloway had made exact calculations. It was Sunday, the day Whitmore's men slept late after a night of drinking at the saloon. They entered through the east side of the village, moving between buildings like shadows. The bank was silent, just as Holloway predicted. The back window gave way after 3 minutes of careful work. Rosa slipped inside while Holloway kept watch from outside. Whitmore's private office was on the 2nd floor, and Rosa went up the stairs. Holding her breath at every creak of the wood, she found the door closed. But she had learned to pick simple locks by watching Miguel repair doors at the ranch. Inside the office, she found what she needed: filing cabinets full of documents meticulously organized by year. She looked for the year 1875, the year of the Castellanos murder, and there they were, the property transfers of the Castellanos mine. Falsified debt documents bearing Whitmore's name, dated merely 2 weeks following the murder, identical to those previously used against Miguel. Letters exchanged with silver buyers that discussed undeveloped seams at the Castellanos mine. Using Holloway's camera, Rosa captured each page in a photograph. She had mastered its operation during the journey. However, as she was finishing, she heard voices from below. Someone had arrived at the bank early. She peered out through the office window. Holloway was frantically signaling to her about the danger. 3 men had just entered the bank through the main entrance. Rosa quickly stowed away the camera and the documents. She couldn't exit via the same way she entered without being noticed. She required an alternative route. She recalled something Miguel had mentioned. The town's old buildings had rooftop access hatches for maintenance purposes. She searched frantically until she located a narrow staircase that led to a roof hatch. She climbed up just as she heard footsteps ascending the stairs toward Whitmore's office. From above, she silently shut the hatch and lay flat on the rooftop. Below, she heard Whitmore's voice as he entered his office. Ditch reported that the widow is in Tucson speaking with the federal marshal. We must eliminate her before she gives official testimony. Do you want us to go to Tucson? Asked another voice. No, too much risk of federal attention. But I have a contact in the senator's office. They will apply pressure to discredit her testimony as the ravings of a traumatized widow. They can't press charges against me if they don't have solid physical evidence. As she caressed the camera, Rosa gave a slight smile. Hidden among her clothes, she carried the physical evidence that Whitmore considered non-existent. She remained on the roof for 2 hours until Whitmore and his team left. Then she carefully climbed down and escaped through the same back window. Holloway was waiting with the horses ready to leave. I thought you had been caught. I was close, but I got what we need. They left the town on horseback without anyone seeing them. 3 days later, they delivered the photos to Marshall Foster in Tucson. Foster examined the photographs, and his satisfaction grew. It's perfect. Direct evidence of fraud, an obvious motive for murder, and a criminal pattern spanning 20 years. Enough to arrest him and ruin him completely. However, none of them were aware that Whitmore had already anticipated that move. At the very moment Rosa stole the evidence, he had already set his final plan in motion. Get rid of all witnesses before they testified, including Marshall Foster. The final confrontation was about to begin. Marshall Foster coordinated the largest federal operation ever seen in the Arizona territory. 12 agents arrived from Phoenix, Yuma, and Flagstaff. They carried arrest warrants not only for Whitmore, but also for Sheriff Morrison, Dutch Kruger, and 18 other accomplices listed in the stolen papers. Foster explained during the planning session, we will attack several points simultaneously: the bank, Whitmore's residence, and the sheriff's office. At the ranch Dutch uses as an operations base, we will prevent anyone from fleeing or destroying evidence. Rosa and Holloway were reviewing the maps together. We don't expect Whitmore to surrender without a fight. He risks too much, so we will go with all our force. Foster indicated the distribution on the map: 6 agents to the bank, 4 to Whitmore's home, and 2 to stop the sheriff. Dutch inquired, and Holloway? He will be the most dangerous of all. Holloway has holed up in a ranch, guarded by at least a dozen armed men. We will need considerable force to confront him. Foster had already sent a telegram to Fort Huachuca. A cavalry unit would arrive in 2 days to provide military support for the mission. Nevertheless, Rosa was experiencing growing anxiety. 2 days is too long. Whitmore has informants. In case he discovers our plans, those fears materialized that very night. Agent Williams, who had been assigned to watch the hotel where Rosa was staying, was found dead in an alley. His throat had been cut. Foster, with a stern expression, commented, "This is a message from Whitmore. He's letting us know he knows our plans and that he doesn't hesitate to murder federal agents." Margaret Morrison hurried into the marshal's offices. "My home was attacked. They tried to set the house on fire with oil lamps. The neighbors put out the flames, but they left a note nailed to the door. The message, concise and cruel, read, 'Hand over the widow, or all who protect her will perish.'" Rosa felt overwhelmed with guilt. "All of this is because of me. I cannot allow more people to die protecting me. That's exactly what Whitmore wants." Foster stated firmly, "He wants you to feel responsible, to surrender, for us to give up, but we won't give him that satisfaction." Holloway added, "Each of us decided to support you, fully aware of the dangers. Agent Williams, Margaret, everyone. We honor their sacrifices by seeing this through in the right way." Foster made a decision. "We cannot wait 2 days. We will attack tomorrow at dawn with the means available." 12 federal agents against about 30 of Whitmore's men. "Those are unfavorable odds," Holloway commented, "but we have the element of surprise and legal authority." Foster told Rosa, "Besides, we have a witness that Whitmore fears above all, a widow who refuses to remain silent." That night, Rosa was unable to fall asleep. She walked the streets of Tucson while the agents watched her, pondering how her life had been completely transformed in just 30 days. Before, she was a rancher's wife with a simple and happy life. Afterward, a harassed widow fleeing into the desert. Currently, she was the centerpiece of a federal operation aimed at deciding whether justice would prevail over corruption. She went to the local church where she found Father Miguel, an elderly clergyman who had dealt with the Castellanos 2 decades earlier. Father Miguel told her that Rodrigo was a good man and that he came to confession a week before his death. He confessed to me that he had found a horrible evil, but that he was willing to risk everything to do what was right. He indicated that he had made a discovery. Father Miguel hesitated. The seal of confession is inviolable. However, Rodrigo released me from that secrecy before he died. He stated that if something happened to him, I would have to reveal the whole truth. The priest took out an old parish register book. Rodrigo found out that Whitmore not only stole properties, but also sold deeds of land that were not his to settlers arriving from the east. Dozens of families acquired lands that legally were owned by Mexican miners. And when the legitimate owners raised their voices, they ended up disappearing. Whitmore employed individuals like Dutch to suppress anyone who challenged his businesses. Father Miguel showed a list of names contained in the parish registry. These are all the people who came to me with suspicions about Whitmore over 20 years. And 8 have died, 5 are missing, and only 3 managed to flee the region. Rosa listed the names. Why did you never report this to the authorities? I did it repeatedly. However, Whitmore bribed the sheriff, the local judge, and even the previous marshal. Until now, no one was investigating his crimes. Father Miguel gave her the register. Use it as additional evidence. These names correspond to 20 years of victims. Give voice to the deceased. Rosa returned to the marshal's office with the church register. Foster examined it with an expression that grew increasingly grim. This turns the case from fraud and isolated homicides into an organized criminal conspiracy spanning 2 decades. Whitmore could face the death penalty at the federal level. That is enough to persuade the judge to issue immediate arrest warrants. It is more than enough. However, when Foster wanted to send a telegram to the federal judge in Phoenix, he discovered that the telegraph lines had been cut. Whitmore had anticipated his move and had cut off communication with the outside. "We are cut off," said Foster. "We cannot request reinforcements, nor inform our superiors. We are alone against Whitmore." Holloway inspected his revolver carefully. "Then let's finish this before he can organize more defenses." The operation was scheduled at dawn the following day. Each deputy received a specific task. Despite the objections, Rosa insisted on going with them. "I am the key witness," she claimed. "If things go wrong, I must be present to testify about what Whitmore intended to do." Foster eventually gave in, though he imposed a condition: "You will stay behind the lines, escorted by 2 deputies. Under no circumstances will you approach the combat zone." That last night, Rosa wrote a letter to Miguel recounting everything she had accomplished after his death. "My love, I found a way to avenge your murder and to bring justice for dozens of other victims. The Castilian family provided me with the necessary resources, and kind people gave me support I never imagined. Tomorrow we will finish what you started when you uncovered Whitmore's crimes. If something happens to me, you should know that I died fighting, not fleeing. Your wife, who loves you forever, Rosa." In case of her death, she kept the letter with the Castellanos' will and the mining property titles. She wanted someone to know the whole story. At the break of dawn the following day, 12 federal deputies rode toward the town that Whitmore had ruled for 2 decades. Rosa, she rode with them with Miguel's rifle across her saddle and an unshakable determination in her heart. The final battle for justice was about to begin, and whatever the outcome, Rosa knew she would never again be the terrified widow who fled to the desert a month ago. She had transformed from survivor to warrior, At dawn, when the sun had just begun to light up the dusty streets, the federal deputies entered the town. Foster strategically deployed his forces. 6 men to the bank, 4 to Whitmore's house, and 2 to Sheriff Rose's office. Accompanied by Holloway and 2 deputies acting as bodyguards, she waited on the outskirts. From her position, she could see the bank building, where it all started with Miguel's forged debts. The first sign of trouble was when Deputy Johnson came running out of the bank shouting, "It's empty! There's no one here!" While other deputies reported the same, Foster ran toward the bank. All the targets, Whitmore's house and the sheriff's office, were deserted, as if they had been evacuated overnight. Holloway immediately said it was a trap, because Whitmore knew exactly when we would attack. His prediction was confirmed when gunshots were heard from the rooftops of the surrounding buildings. Whitmore's men, hidden and waiting, had turned the town center into a kill zone. The deputies ran and took cover behind water troughs and wooden pillars. Foster shouted orders trying to organize the defense, but they were trapped in an exposed position. In the first few minutes, Rosa saw 2 deputies fall wounded. As bullets whistled nearby, Holloway pushed her behind an overturned wagon. Rosa shouted, "We have to get the wounded out. If you poke your head out, they'll kill you instantly." Holloway fired at a shooter positioned on the roof of the saloon. "Whitmore wants you to try to rescue them, but you're using the wounded as bait." However, Rosa could not stay hidden. While good men died protecting her, she remembered a lesson from Miguel about combat tactics from his time in the war against Mexico. He mentioned to Holloway that the eastern side of the village has an irrigation canal and we can use it to flank the snipers. Holloway made a quick assessment. First, you'd have to move across open ground. I have a more effective proposal. Rosa pointed to the barn located at the edge of the village. If we can cause a stampede of horses, we'll create enough commotion for Foster to reposition his people. Although the plan was dangerous, Holloway recognized its logic. "I'll handle it. You stay here under cover. It's my idea, so I'll go." Before Holloway could object, Rosa crept forward to the stable, using the buildings for cover. The shots landed nearby, but none managed to wound her. Upon reaching the stable, she found a dozen horses agitated by the gunfire. She opened all the gates and fired a shot from her rifle towards the roof. The horses fled in a terrified stampede, charging straight through the heart of the village. The chaos created was just what Foster needed. His assistants advanced, sheltered by the dust and confusion. They reached better positions, but Rosa had given away her location. Dutch Kruger appeared at the barn entrance accompanied by 3 armed men. "Finally, the widow leaves her hiding place," Dutch said, with a ruthless smile. "Whitmore will be very pleased when I present you." Rosa raised her rifle, but Dutch proved to be faster. He fired, and the bullet hit Rosa's gun, snatching it from her hands. "Now you're going to come with me without any trouble." Dutch stepped forward confidently. "Or I'll shoot you in the legs and drag you." Rosa backed away toward the barn while weighing her options. Under her dress, she had Miguel's other rifle hidden, but she needed time to reach it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, trying to stall. "How much is Whitmore paying you to be his hitman?" "Enough to live comfortably after getting rid of problems like you." Dutch moved even closer. "You should have accepted losing the ranch without a fight. Now you'll lose much more." At that moment, Holloway appeared behind Dutch and his henchmen. "Drop your weapons or die right there." Dutch turned and fired, but Holloway, seasoned in countless battles, shot first, bringing Dutch down. The other 3 men surrendered without delay. Rosa picked up her rifle and left the barn. The gunfire had noticeably diminished. Upon seeing Dutch captured, Whitmore's men began to surrender. Foster hurried to secure the area. "Where is Whitmore?" he shouted to one of the prisoners. "He left last night," the man replied. "He said if we couldn't take out the Federals, he'd be in Mexico before dawn." An immense frustration overwhelmed Rosa. Although the battle was won, Whitmore had managed to escape. Holloway commented that he couldn't go very far, since there were only 3 roads to the border and he could intercept him. Foster hesitated and said he had no authority to allow a pursuit without jurisdiction. Rosa replied that there was no need for authorization, as she mounted the most rested horse in the stable. "I will act at my own risk. Whitmore murdered my husband and dozens of people. I won't let him get away." Holloway, while mounting another horse, told her she needed help because he knew the area well. Foster finally accepted. In theory, both would act as civilians. Unofficially, if they caught Whitmore and brought him back, he would face a full federal trial. The 2 riders, Rosa and Holloway, headed south on horseback. They took the most feasible route to the border, and Holloway showed that he truly knew the terrain. Holloway spotted fresh tracks leading to a narrow canyon, which provided a secret access to Mexico. After 3 hours of riding, they spotted a lone rider ahead. It turned out to be Whitmore. He was alone, carrying saddlebags that surely contained the money stolen over 20 years. Upon seeing them approach, Whitmore spurred his horse desperately, but the animal was exhausted from the night's ride. Since Rosa and Holloway's horses were rested, they managed to catch up to him in open terrain. Whitmore tried to shoot, but Rosa hit him first in the arm, and the banker fell off his horse amid cries of pain. She got off her horse and stood before the man who had ruined so many lives. "Thomas Whitmore, by the authority delegated by Federal Marshal Foster, you are under arrest for multiple murder, fraud, and criminal conspiracy." Whitmore glared at her, filled with hatred. "You're just a foolish widow. You have no power." Holloway intervened. "But I do," and displayed a deputy's badge that Foster had secretly given him. "And she is the key witness who will destroy you in federal court." Whitmore was dragged back to town, where Foster already had all the prisoners under control. The banker was chained up with Dutch and his men in a makeshift jail. That night, Rosa finally allowed the deputies to rest. The injured received care from local doctors. None died, although 2 had serious injuries. Margaret Morrison brought food for all the deputies. The whole town is celebrating. Whitmore ruled this place through terror for 20 years. At last we can breathe freely. However, Foster had another concern. The legal process would take months. "We must ensure that all witnesses remain protected until the court hearing." "Where will the trial be held?" Rosa inquired. "In Phoenix. Judge Wilson of the Federation presides over the territorial courts. He has a reputation for being irreproachable." Over the following week, Rosa provided a detailed testimony to the scribes who recorded every detail of the case. Rosa recounted the murder of Miguel, the altered papers, her discovery of the Castellanos' wagon, and the evidence in the mine. More witnesses began to emerge. Families who had lost their lands to Whitmore decades earlier and workers who had witnessed murders. Even Father Miguel came from Tucson to hand over his parish record of victims. The indictment against Whitmore was overwhelming. He was charged with 23 counts of murder, 47 counts of fraud, and multiple counts of conspiracy and bribery of officials. Nevertheless, Rosa was aware that the trial was still months away. In the meantime, she had to decide what to do with the assets she had inherited from the Castellanos. One afternoon, she walked back to the deserted town of Silver Springs. The buried wagon was still there, guarding the secrets of the murdered family. Rosa settled inside the wagon and read Elena's diary again. On the last page, she found a note she had not noticed before. "If someone finds this refuge after our death, let them not mourn us. We lived fully, loved intensely, and left something capable of serving others." That is true immortality, Elena. Rosa closed the diary with renewed understanding. The Castellanos had not only bequeathed money and properties, they left a legacy based on using resources for the common good. She made a decision that would transform the rest of her existence. The judicial process against Thomas Whitmore began in Phoenix 3 months after his arrest. The courtroom was packed with journalists, victims' families, and curious onlookers who had arrived from all corners of the country. Whitmore remained seated in the defendant's dock. Along with Dutch Kruger and Sheriff Morrison, they all faced federal charges that could lead to prison. Federal prosecutor William Bradford opened the case with forceful statements. Over 20 years, Thomas Whitmore ran a criminal empire hidden behind the facade of a respectable bank. He embezzled real estate, altered documents, ordered homicides, and turned an entire town into a network of organized crime. Today, we prove each charge with undeniable evidence. Over 2 weeks, the prosecutor presented an overwhelming amount of evidence: the forged documents that Rosa had photographed and Father Miguel's parish register. The survivors' testimonies and material evidence from the Castellanos mine indicated that Whitmore had desperately sought silver that he never found. Nevertheless, the decisive testimony would be Rosa's. She was the only witness linking all the crimes: the murder of Miguel, the real estate fraud, the connection with the Castellanos, and the written order to kill her. When Rosa was called to the stand, total silence reigned in the room. Dressed in a simple but dignified dress, she spoke with a clear and firm voice for 6 hours. She narrated her life with Miguel, an honest man who uncovered corruption and was murdered for it, and told how she escaped into the desert. The discovery of the buried carriage and the location of the Castellanos' papers. Mr. Whitmore not only murdered my husband, declared Rosa, fixing her gaze on the accused. He wiped out an entire family, including 3 young children, because Rodrigo Castellanos planned to reveal his crimes. Over 2 decades, he continued killing anyone who questioned his activities. The defense attorney tried to discredit her statements. Mrs. Delgado, you are a tormented widow with a personal interest in lying about my client. How can we be sure you haven't made up this entire story? Rosa calmly displayed the images of Whitmore's documents and Rodrigo's letters. Castellanos, addressed to the marshal, the church book, and the signed order to kill him, found in Dutch's saddlebags. I didn't invent the documents written in Whitmore's own hand, she stated firmly. I didn't invent 23 families who were stripped of their lands using the same deceptive methods. I didn't invent the widow of Sergeant Williams killed for protecting me. The most intense moment came when the prosecutor presented Dutch Kruger's statement. The foreman had agreed to testify against Whitmore in exchange for a lighter sentence. Whitmore hired me in the year 1887, Dutch stated. My job was to solve problems. That involved intimidating, assaulting, killing if necessary. In 8 years, I killed or helped kill 11 people under Whitmore's direct orders. Why did you act that way? The prosecutor asked. Because the pay was good and because Whitmore controlled the sheriff, the judge, everyone. He believed he was invulnerable. What happened to change that? Dutch looked toward Rosa. Everything changed because of that widow. She was expected to be an easy victim, a woman alone with no resources or allies, but she refused to be one. She managed to survive, found evidence, gathered witnesses, and completely dismantled Whitmore's operation. It made me realize I was working for the wrong side. Dutch's account was supported by 2 of his subordinates, who also agreed to testify. They recounted specific homicides, techniques used, and direct orders issued by Whitmore. The defense tried to argue that the witnesses were lying in exchange for deals with the prosecution. The evidentiary documents were irrefutable. Whitmore's signature appeared on falsified documents. His bank statements revealed payments to Dutch that matched the dates of the murders, and his correspondence mentioned the removal of obstacles. Judge Wilson listened to all the testimony with an expression that grew increasingly severe. When it came time for closing arguments, Prosecutor Bradford summed up forcefully, Thomas Whitmore is not simply a criminal, but an architect of a system that turned murder into a business practice. 22 people have died because he valued money more than human lives. He deserves the maximum penalty allowed by federal law. The defense weakly argued about reasonable doubt and unreliable witnesses, but no one in the courtroom believed their arguments. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Upon returning, the foreman stood up with a somber expression. The case is the Territory of Arizona versus Thomas Whitmore. We find the defendant guilty on all charges of first-degree murder, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The verdict was met with absolute silence, followed by collective sighs of relief. The families of the victims sobbed as they embraced. Rosa felt a great weight lifted from her shoulders. Whitmore slumped in his seat as he finally understood that his empire had come to an end. Judge Wilson showed no mercy when passing the sentence. Thomas Whitmore was found guilty of crimes against human dignity. He was sentenced to death by hanging. The sentence will be carried out within 30 days. Dutch Kruger and Sheriff Morrison received life imprisonment thanks to their cooperation. The other 14 accomplices were sentenced to terms ranging from 10 to 40 years. However, for Rosa, justice was not yet complete. After the trial, she had a private conversation with Judge Wilson. Your Honor, the families of Whitmore's victims have lost everything. What kind of compensation will they receive? The judge reflected on the matter. From a legal standpoint, the assets seized from Whitmore will be auctioned and the money distributed among the accredited victims, but the process will take several years. I have a suggestion for you, Rosa. She showed some documents drafted by a lawyer she had hired. I received a significant inheritance from the Castellanos family, and I want to create a fund to immediately compensate the families of the victims. The judge examined the papers carefully. This is incredibly kind. The Castellanos dedicated their fortune to helping those in need, and I received it at the moment I needed it most. Now, there are dozens of families going through a similar situation. It is my obligation to offer you help. In the following months, Rosa collaborated with lawyers to found the organization Castellanos Delgado for Justice. This foundation granted financial compensation to the families who had been stripped of their assets due to the fraud committed by Whitmore. Nevertheless, Rosa did much more than that. She used a portion of the Castellanos inheritance to create a law firm that provided free legal defense to widows and orphans. She funded a women's training program, instructing them in business and legal skills. When Whitmore's execution took place, Rosa was not present. Instead, she visited the buried wagon in Silver Springs for the last time. She had chosen to preserve the wagon as a memorial to the Castellanos family. She erected a protective structure around it and commissioned a plaque that told its story. In this place, the Castellanos hid their fortune before being killed by a greedy criminal. 2 decades later, their inheritance rescued a widow on the run and achieved justice for dozens of victims. May this site be an eternal reminder that good triumphs over evil when brave individuals refuse to remain silent. Weeks after Whitmore's death, Foster went to see Rosa. What do you plan to do next? Rosa fixed her gaze on the horizon of the Arizona desert. I will continue with the work. There are other criminals like Whitmore operating in the region. Other widows need assistance. The Castellanos family provided me with a tool. Now I have a duty to use it. Do you need Putty Federal as an ally? Asked Foster, always smiling. The fight for justice had ended, but the work of protecting the helpless was just beginning. At 35, 3 years later, Rosa walked the streets of Phoenix dressed in an elegant business suit. She had become a recognized figure in the territory's courts, defending widows and orphans who suffered injustices similar to those she had endured. The Castellanos Delgado Foundation managed offices in 5 cities and had contributed to the recovery of stolen properties for 43 families. She had successfully prosecuted 7 additional bank fraud cases and had established 3 shelters for women escaping abusive situations. The Castellanos mine, now operated ethically under Rosa's supervision, employed 30 workers with fair wages and safe conditions. The profits were used to fund the foundation's operations. However, Rosa had not forgotten her roots. Each month, she traveled to the town that was once under Whitmore's control, now renamed Nueva Esperanza. The ranch that Whitmore had taken from her was legally returned, and she turned it into a school for orphaned girls. Margaret Morrison ran the school, teaching not only reading and math, but also practical skills, money management, identification of fraudulent documents, and legal defense. Proudly, Margaret told her, the first graduating class will graduate next month. 12 young women who arrived with nothing and now have education and skills for an independent life. Holloway had become the foundation's lead investigator using his military skills. To document cases of corruption and fraud, he had created a network of contacts throughout the territory who reported suspicious situations. Holloway informed Rosa, "We have a new case in Yuma. It involves a widow whose husband died in a mining accident. The mine owner denies compensation, claiming the husband violated safety regulations." Rosa asked, "Evidence?" Witnesses state that the owner deliberately ignored dangerous conditions to save costs. The accident was foreseeable. Let's prepare the case and travel to Yuma tomorrow. This had become Rosa's daily routine. Detecting injustices, gathering evidence, and litigating in court. Using the foundation's funds to balance the scales between the disadvantaged and the powerful. However, she had also discovered a personal side she never imagined. Foster had left his position as marshal to join the foundation as legal director. After 3 years of collaboration, their work relationship had turned into something more intimate. One night, after winning an especially complex case, Foster asked Rosa to marry him. "I don't promise you a peaceful existence," he told her. Our work will always involve risks, but I commit to being your partner in this cause that we both consider essential." Rosa said yes, not because she needed a husband, but because she found an ally who shared her principles and her mission. They married in a simple ceremony at the New Hope School, with the presence of girls benefited by the institution, families rescued from bankruptcy by the foundation, and friends who had fought alongside them. Father Miguel presided over the ceremony. "Rosa, you have turned your personal pain into redemption for others. You have shown that a brave individual can transform an entire system." That evening, Rosa and Foster settled on the porch of the house they had built next to the school, watching the stars over the Arizona desert. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if Miguel hadn't died?" Foster asked quietly. Rosa thought, honestly, it would have been a happy but limited existence. She would have loved Miguel, worked the ranch, and raised their children. None of that would have been wrong. But I would never have found my inner strength, never have helped so many families, never have turned suffering into a mission. Rosa caressed the photograph of Miguel that she always carried with her. Miguel's death devastated me. However, the pursuit of justice for his murder forged me into a more resilient version than before. Do you think he would be proud? I am convinced that he would be. The subsequent years brought additional triumphs and certain inevitable failures. It was not possible to win every case, nor to rescue every victim. Nevertheless, the foundation grew to become a nationally recognized organization. In 1912, when Arizona achieved statehood, Rosa was summoned to the official ceremony among the pioneers. She had transformed the region, once controlled by criminals, into a community governed by law and justice. The governor paid public tribute to her. Rosa Delgado Foster symbolizes the noblest of Arizona. She overcame tragedy, pursued justice, and used her resources to improve the lives of countless families. She demonstrates that a determined person can transform the world. However, the honor Rosa most valued was the letter she received from one of the first graduates of the school in Nueva Esperanza. "Dear Rosa, I arrived at your institution as an orphan, terrified after my family was wiped out. You showed me that being a woman without male protection does not mean being vulnerable. You taught me that I can access education, a profession, and autonomy. Today, I am a teacher in a small community, passing on to other young women the teachings I received from you. Your legacy expands with every life you touch. At age 57, in 1920, Rosa made a final visit to the buried wagon in Silver Springs. The monument she had erected had become a pilgrimage site for women seeking inspiration. She sat back down in the restored wagon, immersed in reading Elena Castellanos' diary. The last words took on a much deeper meaning. Whoever discovers this refuge after our death, let them not shed tears for us. We enjoyed life to the fullest, loved without reservation, and left behind something that could benefit others. That is what constitutes true immortality. Rosa finally understood that the Castellanos endured in every family rescued thanks to the Miguel Foundation. Her legacy lived on in the justice obtained in her name, and she would continue to exist through the countless women. They would learn that they have the capacity to be strong, independent, and limitless. She wrote a final entry in her personal diary, which she had kept since the moment she found the wagon. I began this journey as a frightened widow, fleeing into the desert to survive. I found shelter in a buried wagon and discovered a legacy that completely changed my fate. However, the true inheritance was not money or material possessions. It was the decision that pain can be transformed into a life mission, that injustice can drive transformation, and that a person who refuses to stay silent can spark an entire movement. To every woman who reads these words in the future, your voice has value and influence. Your existence is valuable. Your suffering can become a strength to provide help to those in need. Do not let anyone make you believe that you are fragile simply because you are a woman and lack male protection. True strength does not come from men protecting us. It arises from ourselves when we discover that we can overcome any adversity. We are capable of facing any struggle and rebuilding any life that has been devastated. The Castellanos passed this truth to me. Now I hand it over to the next generation. Rosa Delgado Foster, in the year 1920. After closing it, Rosa left the diary in the cart next to Elena's. Two stories intertwine, two families united by tragedy and redemption, two legacies that would continue to be sources of inspiration. As she rode back to Phoenix, where Foster and dozens of cases awaited her, Rosa experienced total peace. She had lost Miguel. She endured a terrible injustice and shed tears of despair inside a buried cart. However, she discovered an inner strength she never knew she had, achieved a justice that seemed unattainable, and forged a legacy that would benefit future generations. Under the intense blue sky, the Arizona desert stretched out endlessly. It was the same desert she had fled in terror 30 years ago, but now she looked upon it with a different perspective. It was no longer a place of death and hopelessness, but a place of change and rebirth. There, a humble widow transformed into a fighter for justice, where a temporary shelter became an endless mission, where the tears of suffering turned into a firm determination to build a more equitable world. If this story of overcoming injustice in the Wild West moved you, subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for the next motivational narratives. Tell us in the comments what you think about the courage of this widow who faced an oppressive system. May the Lord protect all women who fight for their dignity and for a better future.